Alright guys, gonna do a little driving video today. So just had an issue that I wanted to talk about. I didn't really get any of it on video. It was just kind of one of those organic things that just happened to happen. So went to the track with the Z the other day. Everything was fine. No real issues related to like the coolant temp gauge or anything like that. So I went to go take it to O'Reilly's the other day just to go pick something up, and drove it there, started up, drove, everything was great, and then I went to go start it again and it wouldn't start, and I had to like open the throttle blade to get it to start. Like it was really rich and had too much fuel. So it was strange because the coolant temp gauge also stopped working at that point. And I did notice like a week or so ago, one day I started it and then got in a few minutes later after I had parked it in the garage, and got in a few minutes later after I parked it in the garage, and the coolant temp gauge didn't work. It was weird. I knew it was warm, but it wasn't there. I didn't really think much of it, and then I drove it for a few days after that and never really had an issue. So today, the same thing happened. I went to go fill my bottle for my welder, and I drove it all the way to the place, watched it warm up, temp was fine, everything was good. But because of the incident at O'Reilly's when the gauge wasn't working, I did put a new coolant temp sensor in it yesterday. So wanted to test the new thing, drove it to the store today, and everything was fine. Coolant temp came up to normal temp on the gauge, everything was good. Go in, pay for the bottle, go get in the car to drive around back to exchange the bottle, and same situation. Car would barely start, had to open throttle blade, and I saw a big puff of like smoke come out because it was really rich. And at that point it's running at like an 11.0 air fuel ratio, like an 11.0, 11.5, so it's super rich. So it was acting like a bad coolant temp sensor still, which would make it really rich because it thinks that it's cold when it's actually hot. So I knew I put a new sensor in. I knew the wiring is good, or I assume the wiring is good because it's a brand new harness, and I can't imagine that it would go bad already. So I drove around, putzed around for a while, and I noticed that when I would drive it, the coolant temp gauge would slowly start to come up to temp, even though I had that like rich issue. And then after a while, coolant temp would come up, and then wideband would go back to where it's supposed to be. So super strange. So I went back home, grabbed the scanner, put it on the scanner, keyed the car off, and this was where I thought I really had a problem and I was getting frustrated. So I got back home, the coolant temp gauge was reading fine, keyed the car off, keyed it right back on, and the coolant temp gauge was reading at like basically zero again, like on the dash, nothing. And then had the same no start or hard to start issue. Went home, got the scanner, went inside, got the scanner, put it on the scanner, and the coolant temp was like 220 or whatever because it was sitting there hot soaking for a little while, so it was at 220. And really strange. So the scanner's reading 2 something, normal temperature, engine is hot, and gauge still not working. So went out and I went to go drive it, and I tested this a couple more times where I would just get in the car, go drive, and then the coolant temp gauge would slowly come up to temperature as the scanner would come down to normal temperature after it was hot soaking for a little while. So and the wideband would also go from like an 11 rich, and I would gradually just come back to the 15.2 where it's normally at, where I'm cruising. So started scanning a bunch of different parameters and trying to look at what was happening, because it was also, what it was also doing was it was opening the throttle blade another 4%. So my throttle position was changing along with this gauge not working correctly and not matching the temperature on the scanner. So I was trying to figure out what was happening there. And then what I decided to do was log all of the engine coolant temp parameters that I could find, because I had a feeling it was related to the cooling temp sensor, right? So it was weird because I'm scanning the engine coolant temp sensor SAE version, but there's a engine coolant temperature, and there's a couple different parameters in the scanner, and there's like a starting coolant temp parameter. So I logged all of those parameters, and what I found was that car off and then key the car back on, one was reading at 68 and one was reading at 207 when I started to look at it. So I looked at it again, keyed it off, keyed it back on, and that one reset back to 68 degrees. So took it for a drive after I found that, and then as the gauge slowly started to creep up, the 68 degrees on the scanner started to creep up. So knew there was a discrepancy there. I had one parameter that was matching the gauge, one that was reading actual coolant temperature, and then I decided to look at the check engine codes, which I should have done, and I got to get better at doing that when I'm having issues, like just look at the codes right away and see what's going on. So I ended up running the codes while I was driving, scanning, and then I just clicked the read DTCs button, and then it came up, my mass airflow came up because it's in speed density, so that was normal, and then I had 2 engine coolant temp sensor codes. So interesting. So I clicked clear DTCs to clear all the codes. The math came right back up, stumbled a little bit because it has to reset the math code. And then the coolant temp gauge went right back to normal. The wideband went right back to normal. And then both parameters on the scanner were reading the same exact number. So I did replace the sensor. So what I'm thinking happened is the sensor actually went bad. I replaced the sensor and then just never cleared the codes. So just kind of wanted to talk about that. I know it's kind of a long ramble, but I spent 2 days trying to figure out what it was. So maybe it'll help someone down the road. So symptoms were cold start. It would start and then run, come up to temp just fine, but I'd shut it off and then go back to turn it back on. Like you go in the store, come back out, turn it back on, and then it was hard to start, reading super rich. And basically what I'm thinking happened is it stores those codes when it has a bad sensor, and what it's doing is giving you a visual indicator aside from a check engine light that your coolant temp gauge isn't working. So it's still reading temperature, but it's like trying to tell you that there's a problem. So that's my wizardry. I don't know, that's just what I went through, so I wanted to share it with you guys. And you can see it perfectly on the scan too, because I was logging 2 parameters. One was reading 68 at first and one was reading a different number, and as soon as I hit that, boom, they both went to the same spot and everything's fine.